So I think there's still some people joining. So I see the number of participants going up, going up, going up. So I think we are just going to do some very gentle introduction before we start. Maybe I will give you a little bit about participants for today. So this morning, it looks like we've got close to 100 participants. A lot of people from Poland, very large cohort from Poland, people from France, Germany, but also China, Denmark, Finland, Belgium, Albania. We also have people from Portugal, Romania, Russia, Singapore, Slovakia, Slovenia. So, and of course, Switzerland, Turkey, the UK, and UAE. So really very international audience this morning. Very broad representation of industries as well. I think, people from the pharma industry, people from the automotive sector, people from the telecom sector, banking, manufacturing. So, yeah, it's fantastic to see all these, diversity of people being, interesting in the topic of today. So maybe we can start. Still some people joining, but we can start with a very brief introduction of myself and Andressa. So Andressa, I'll let you introduce yourself, because today this webinar will be co-run by me and Andressa.
Yes, hello everyone. So ladies first, right? So I'm Andressa Hayes. So I'm a global category buyer for IT, and I work for Heineken. And I'm here presenting that, co-hosting that with Hervé, because we built that process. We created the process while you're doing a certification for purchasing manager in EIPM. So very happy to be here with you.
Okay, great. And I'm Hervé. I'm a professor at EIPM, and I also run all the research, coordinate all the research activities on EIPM side. So, some of you might have heard me on the topic of innovation in the previous webinars. So, yeah, so let's go. Just maybe a few information. Anytime you can put some chat question into the chat section. You should probably find that on the bottom right of your screen. And what will happen at the end of the session, you will have the video replay for the session, so you can have the recording, and you will receive a copy of the slides in a PDF version. So you will get everything, but that will be at the end of the session. Yeah. And we will have a short feedback towards the end of the webinar as well. Just starting gently in the topic, when I started to look in in Google, and I tried to put the word agility, I started to get all these pictures, so fantastic perspective on agility, all these dogs running and doing this fantastic type of moves. But why are we talking about this topic these days? Why is Agile on the agenda? I think what I see too often is people talking about Agile as meeting in front of a board to look at priorities from time to time, or some of these more managerial aspects. But really, what we want to go into today is really something that's much more relating to the Agile vendor selection process. So how do we bring agility? How do we bring Agile in our core processes within procurement? And we've got typically, I've met many of these buyers that say, I always end up using my traditional RFQ vendor selection process to achieve cost saving. But in my heart, I would really want to collaborate and create a bit more value. So a lot of good intention, but we always end up using the same kind of process, following the same kind of steps, and we end up focusing on massifying. And there's a few people there, saying we do things slightly differently, yeah? But we keep quiet because this is not the way of doing things in procurement. So yeah, future, we live in a world where the pace of change is significant, both on the supply side and the demand side. And basically, we need to find ways of building on both worlds, this world of power, where we can, leverage the relationship we have, but also, building on pace. So being to work in sync together with the business partner, running with them at the same pace and running with supplier at the same pace. So that was one of the motivation to start to look into this logic of agile vendor selection process. Maybe I should also pay tribute to Mirko Kleiner, who's been one of the person in Europe who started to bring this topic forward. Many years ago, I was actually expecting people from the Agile community to look into that process one way or another. And this is someone who's been, through Flow Days, his company has been pushing this. And we had a session, a workshop in EIPM, and that was probably about a year and a half ago, where we brought him, and Andresa was part of the participants in this workshop at that time. And that's how the whole thing started. And we're so glad today to report on this practice of agile vendor selection. We've just very recently also received the information that we've written an article on the topic, and this will be published in the European Business Review. So we will also be sharing so it will be out in November. So at that time, we'll be sharing the article with you because, it's interesting just to pass that information, I would say. So I will start a little bit with the background and going through the meaning of Agile. And from that, we will go into the practice that has been implemented by Andresa when she was working actually in Capgemini, and that's where she had all these experimentation and development of this agile vendor selection process. When do we need to have an agile vendor selection process? So this is really fitting situation where there is a certain dimension of unpredictability. So typically, in terms of the needs, there is some unknown. We have new suppliers coming up. They're arriving with new solutions that can differ from each other. Internally, we might have some knowledge about this, but we are not yet sure, of what type of requirement we can set up. So we want to leverage, these external novelty, innovation from supplier. So this is really for situation where the requirement can be quite difficult to formalize because of the diversity of users and the novelty. Agile is about working in a collaborative mode. So whether you're thinking about software development, where Agile has been very active over the years, or whether you think about an Agile vendor selection process, this is a process where we favor face-to-face interaction, both amongst the people, the stakeholders from inside the company, but also with the supplier, in order to make sure that you have the maximum feedback, the maximum degree of transparency, and that you can quickly make some of the adjustments in a very iterative and cumulative process. Also, Agile is about simplification. It's really about focusing on the quality of the exchange and identifying issues early, so we can really make things simple from a process point of view, go straight to the point, and go into the right solutions quite quick. This brings us to the possibility on this document, on this picture, to gain efficiency and speed. We work together in a very simplified interactive mode. So we work at a steady pace, deep engagement, which really helps to go faster around the full process. It's a little bit like the motto going from 8 months to 8 weeks, for the selection of supplier. By doing all this, working collaboratively in simple board, getting the speed and efficiency, one of the benefits is also to, create motivation. People are working together, they feel free to speak, and they're really feeling part of a team that's creating engagement and positive attitude. By doing all this, this is a way to further create value for the client, but also for the internal user. So these principles, you would find them for, any kind of agile implementation. But what we've done here is a slight interpretation of them for the procurement selection process, the vendor selection process. I will give the end to Andressa, but we will start by discussing how there is a match between the classic process for selecting supplier and the agile vendor selection process that we'll describe as a sprint versus the more classic one being described as a marathon. Floor is yours, Andressa. Have we lost Andressa? So in the meantime, I'm just going to check. Andressa has lost the sound. Okay. So I'm looking at the chat. So lots of hellos and good morning from everyone. Yes, there are a lot of Polish colleagues. So while Andressa is coming back to us and rejoining the video, maybe I'll just take you through some of these elements. So one of the key points when we've been thinking about developing this process in order to create an agile vendor selection process is not to disrupt some of the classic gates of an RFQ process, a supplier selection process. There's still, some of the very classic points within the process, like planning and prepare, developing a tender, having a structured process for evaluation, having a process for negotiation, and having some finally an award process for the vendor selected. So the idea is really to follow some of the same steps, but doing this in different way between the classic one running the marathons and the agile one running a sprint. I see Andressa is back.
I'm here. Yes, I had to rejoin again. I'm sorry, everyone. So I was speaking to myself. So the idea here is like not to say that we should just replace everything and just like switch and work in a completely different way, as Hervé said. So it's really the idea that we as procurement teams, we should be bimodal. So what does it really mean? So as you can see here, so there is some differences, some explanations for each of the phases, but it's really to say that all the RFP process that we are used to, like plan and prepare, tendering, evaluation, negotiation, award, they are still there. So we are not like reinventing the wheel. So it's really to approach that in a different way. So you see that by changing the mindset and changing the approach and really prioritizing what matters most can also bring some savings in terms of time. So we go from months to weeks, and that's really what makes the difference. So I won't read all the single words here or all the differences, but it's just to give you really the idea that it's possible, but it's not every single RFP or every single new procurement case that can be applied in a new sprint model, as we say. So it's really to tell that we need still to think bimodal. So if we take the bimodal side and then the agility side, so what kind of process could be applied using the sprint model? So it's more the ones, for example, your stakeholders, they know what they want, so they know the final result. So they know I want to build a car, or I want to buy a software, which is my expertise. So I want what's gonna be the last result that I'm gonna have. But the way to go there, it's flexible. So I really rely on what the vendor is gonna tell me, the subject matter experts, and etc. So when this is flexible on the way, and your stakeholders, they are also allowing some creativity and also willing to play with you in a really collaboration way, which I can tell you, it's most of them are really willing for that. So then we can go for an agile selection process, vendor selection. So the way we've developed it and taking out the steps, and what we really need to do in order to get there, not reinventing the wheel, but changing the mindset. So we ended up together with EIPM, and also with some good real cases that we applied when I was working for Capgemini. So we ended up defining the 7 steps to go for it. So you have here, so the 7 steps. So some of them can really be done in parallel, but the objective, it's really to perform all of them. Each of the cases can be done in a slightly different way, because that's what agile means, right? So you are flexible, you react in time, and you are also flexible to change the course of the plan. So the first one would be really to prepare. So there is no brainstorm here or no new idea. So you should prepare for a normal RFP, right? So you do really the market analysis, the pre-selection vendors, the internal workshops. The difference here is that you are going to really deep dive on the history telling of why you are doing that. So it's really an internal understanding with your stakeholders. Like, okay, so this is what you'd like to do. So that's the final result. But why are you doing that? So what's really the objective for you to do that? So what's at the constraints, the risks? So identifying everything at that time. And more than that as well is like give empowerment to the team. So in Agile, you have some rules or some roles that you play, which are like Scrum Master, the product owner, and etc. So you define that from the beginning of any software development as well. So why shouldn't we also assign those roles from the beginning, so we have a clear understanding of who it's really playing what in the collaboration team? So once you have the preparation, so then you go to the second step, which is the invitation letter. So you can ask me as well, so what's the difference then? I don't really see where how different this process can be for an MRFP. And I used to say that this is the first different step, because instead of sending a big piece of paper to all your vendors, explaining everything, really going into the detail, a lot of pages for the RFP phase, in that process, what you do, you send a simple letter. So it's more an invitation letter. So as you see here, where it's really you are really explaining the basis. So this is the reason why I'm doing that. This is what I would like to achieve. So I'm inviting you to come and tell me how you are going to be able to solve my problem. So that's the difference. And then once we have it, once we have really the interest of the vendors to perform, to do something and come to show us how they can really solve our problem, then we go for the next phase, which is really explaining more detail. And not only on the technical basis or really in the deep dive detail, it's more to tell them from the business perspective what are the pain points the business is passing, so what I really would like to achieve. So that gives the vendor not only the reason why of the solution, like I want this solution or that vendor, that product in place, but also the reason why. So what are the really pain points the business it's suffering that can be solved, and then that gives you then a first background about the reasons why we are doing it. So then we go for the Agile RFP event, where that's the big difference. Some of the companies were already doing that, were inviting many vendors to the same place on supplier innovation days and etc. But here, the objective is to invite the vendors of your RFP, all of them in the same place. So I would jump to the other slide where I'm going to show you a basic agenda to run that so you can understand as well. And once we perform that RFP, Agile RFP event, we go for the normal steps. So we are going to score the vendors, we are going to do the best and final offer from them, really go to the commercials and award the vendor that we selected. The difference here is that when you are preparing, you are having the preparation, the Q&A call, and the Agile event. It's much more based on user telling histories. So really go to telling histories about what's your problem. And then the way to do that is really to create things that can really approach you or have a more personal approach, or that can really touch the pain point you have. So the way we use it to do that in many cases, and the proposed way, it's by creating personas in user journeys. So you can see here, for example, you have Lisa. So Lisa just joined Toyota. So her history is that often on the road, at customer premises, she works offline often, much close attention to details. So read the profile of the person who is going to use it. So who is the user, and what then Lisa is going to do? So in a user journey, so what's the flow Lisa is going to follow? So Lisa is going to interact with her manager, and then after that she has to approve with finance, for example. So what's the journey of Lisa in the solution or in the project I want to buy? So making it more personal and more visual also helps the business and helps the vendor to really understand the final outcome expected from them, because it's their product or the solution you're going to buy.
Can I ask you a question, Andressa?
Sure.
How many personas you would usually have, and do you have more than one user journey? Could you just give us maybe examples or give us a sense of how many of these?
Yeah, so usually we have 4 to 5 personas. So it's not recommended we have more than this, otherwise it can add complexity, and that's what we are really trying to avoid. And then each persona can perform 1, 2, or 3 journeys, for example. We try to limit for 2, or the best practice is then to have like 1 persona, 1 journey. But when you have the journey, it's also cross the journey with the other personas. So you are not a persona alone in a journey, so you are interacting with others as well. So in an example of the first case I've applied that methodology was for a performance management software. So it's a real-time performance management. So I'm talking to you now, I have an app. So that app, I'm able to rate you at real time. Okay, so I like to work with you. So then you have your sign note that, oh, nice to work with him. So in that specific case, we created 5 user journeys. So where that person interacting, so I'm a persona, I'm interacting, and I'm interacting with you, which could be another persona. And at the end, my manager needs to validate the feedback, and then that goes to a award process, for example, where finance also needs to be involved. That's another persona as well. So it really makes you to think who are the ones who are going to use the solution from an admin side, from a user side, or who are the last users, who are the first. So it's really to make you think on the interaction of the people who use it.
Thank you, Andressa. I think this should respond to the question from Darius, who's actually asking, how do we manage user stories on stage 1? So if Darius, you have some further points you need to have an input on, just don't hesitate to put another questions. But I think this should have given you some perspective on it. So no more long detailed requirements, no more technical functional specification, but very clear picture of who is going to be using the solution and how that person is going to interact with the solution as part of the user journey. And I think, an important point in the user journey, it's not about going in full detail about the process itself, but it's about also highlighting what people, like, don't like in these types of situations. So we're focusing really on the problems, on, what makes things easy or uneasy for people, but we are not prescriptive. We're not telling what type of solution we want, simply expressing, the preference of the individuals and some of their problems, pain points, unmet needs, the way you want to call this. Back to
Yeah,
you, Tessa.
and also Agile, it's not about KPIs anymore. So you change KPIs to key VIs. So it's much more about value. So what those personas or those users we really see as a value. So that is the history of why I want to buy it, for example. So back to the question from Darius as well, like how we can use those personas to other steps, like step 2, 3, 4, and 5. So coming back here, so preparation, you are going to define the personas with your internal stakeholders. So you're going to really identify who are the personas and define them. So that's an internal definition of your subject matter experts in your company, of what personas, what user stories you would like to cover. On the invitation letter, so you don't do anything with those because you are just inviting the vendors to come and show you. But on the Q&A call, that's where you give them a flavor. Like most part of the vendors, they already use it to work with that with other clients. So here you're going to tell them, okay, I'm going to share some personas with you, and what is expected from you during the Agile RFP event is to take those personas I'm sharing with you and show me how you are going to perform those steps or how you're going to solve the problem of those personas with your solution, with your product. So that's what it's expecting. When we then score those vendors based on the event itself, we are taking again, so me as a business, for example, I'm taking those personas and I'm seeing, okay, so that vendor really did good on that step, so that user journey, it's fine, amazing. But that other one is not so good. So then I can rate based on the outcomes, on my what I perceive it from their presentation as well. I hope that helps.
Yeah, I'm sure this is, that has been clarifying some of the element and how it links to other stages. Shall we move ahead with the event?
Yes. So here it's an example of the agenda. So that's a 2 days session, 2 days event, where in the morning of the day one, you again explain your personas, your user journeys. You have the business doing that from their perspective. So they are really showing what are the problems, what they like to achieve once again and with more detail. The difference here is that you do that for all of the vendors. So you have the 3 or 4 vendors invited, all in the same place, all in the same room, listening the same things. So we avoid as well to share communications with one vendor that we are not telling the other one, and then we can maximize as well the understanding and the compliance of that as well. They cannot blame us of not telling the same information for everyone. So after really sharing more in deep dive the details of what we want to achieve, we give them some time because they need to think. So they've listened everything, they've received all the feedbacks and all the information from the business. So now it's time for them to really think if they really understood well what we said. So that's the time we let them in their home rooms, as we are saying. So they have individual rooms, each one of the vendors, where they are going to think. And more than just think, they can get some feedback as well. So they can come to the core team or our internal team and ask some question like, did I really understand that this is what you meant? So should I adjust something of my understanding? So it's real-time feedback. Then all of them having lunch together, so it's good for them also to interact. It's amazing how you can see they exchanging business cards, so you are really contributing to the to their careers as well sometimes. And then we go for the breakout sessions. So what are the breakout sessions? So you take your subject matter experts, so who are really the people you need to take decision during the event or during the selection process. I think you are having problems with my audio. Is everyone hearing me okay? Fine, okay,
I can hear you well.
good. So then you are going to have subject matter experts from your end. So who are the subject matter experts from your end? So from my end in a software or IT perspective, so it's security, it's the IT guys, legal because I need to have my contract approve it, GPO because GDPR, so data privacy matters. So who is everyone that needs to be there? And I will assign like breakout sessions for those key people to speak with the key people of the vendor as well. So they will interact one-to-one to determine, okay, so how do you address that point, and that point. So this is done during the whole afternoon of the day 1 and the morning of the day 2 as well. So it's 30-minute sessions each of them where you get the better understanding and you also connect people. So you see how it's going to be working with that vendor in the future. Because at the end, after implementing something or buying something, the real implementation side really relies on people. So that's where you get people connected. So then in the afternoon, after everyone has the same understanding, the vendors really check it, okay, I understand what you need. So then they are going to present that to us. So then you have individual presentations as well of each one of the vendors. So you see here, for example, so you have starting on the 13:30, so 1:30 in the afternoon. So first vendor comes and present. So it's individual. One vendor is not seeing each other presentation. So they come, they go. It's really straightforward. And we advise the vendors not to come and try to sell us the solution, the commercial approach, but really take the user journeys and the personas that we shared with them during the invitation, during the Q&A session. So they take it and they are going to put that and present me how they solve it. So that's what they do. So it's an interactive session, and then afterwards we see we can really have a clear understanding and a people understanding as well with who we're going to work with if we select them to then take our decision and go for the scoring phase. So that's the overall agenda that we use to implement. It's flexible. Each case can go with its own way, but that's the usual agenda we take.
Maybe just a quick comment I could do here, if you want, is
Sure.
this fits really well, these types of agenda, when you have a situation where you're looking at a service or when you're looking at a software, because it's really easy to come up with some prototype, whether you were thinking of services or whether we're thinking of a software. But you can also use a slightly different one if you have, like, if you're buying pieces of equipment for a production or for a lab, there might be a need to communicate some of the element up front, but this can be adapted to different situations. But the key elements is really about touching and seeing what's there. It's not about selling a solution, but being able for people to realize to what extent the solution is actually meeting the expectation of the user and solving their problem for the future. Shall I take the next point, Andressa?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
And please feel free to ask questions as well with anything it's really clear for you on the chat. Thank you.
Yeah, I had the opportunity after Andressa did 3 projects using this methodology to interview some people from the stakeholders, from the business. I had the possibility to interview some of the suppliers. So what were some of the strong feedback? So the first one, and you can read some of these afterward, but and they will be in the final in the article we'll be sharing in a few months. But people don't spend all their time catching up with a multiplicity of projects, and you get to see, you get to talk to people immediately, And if you have an interesting point coming out of a discussion with one of the vendor, if you need to, do something of ask the same question to another one, they're here. So you're really cutting on a lot of time. You're just playing catching up with where I am, how did I rate this one, what information I had here. Okay. Then what people were really keen on is the use of the personas and the user journey, because you really start from high-level business expectations. This is much easier to put together for the users, and for the vendors. This is creating for them a sort of space where they can then, bring the best out of what they've put together. Another key element was, the sheer impact of having something as an event. Some people say the 2 days were memorable. The vendors were a bit surprised by this aspect, but it's really great to have all this discussion. It's a new way of working. It's motivating for people because you've got this kind of hives where all the bees are working at the same time, going from one place to another, and this is really allowing everyone to give their best and to really quickly screen the best solution. And stakeholders within the company said it was really a great investment because in large company, this is really a way to get back to something that's very concrete, very practical, that has the right pace and the right speed with the right engagement of the people. And they were very positive about all the work that was done by Andressa there. I think we've got some questions coming. So yeah, there's a question about choosing the software solution, but about other procurement categories. So we will be coming back a little bit on this a bit further, but I've started to to give you some of this input on this. So whether you're thinking of a service, whether you're thinking of a software, this is indeed a good solutions, but you can also use that for different for other goods, for instance, that you might be buying. I suggest we come back on this point when we'll be looking at when and how to use it. Okay, so let's so what are the success factors? So part of the interviews that I've been able to conduct were really to understand, if you want to implement this type of approach, what would be the success factors? What do you need to make sure that you can achieve if you want to implement this? The first is to build a great team, and a great team is really about getting the right people in the room, the right people with the right level of expertise and with the power to take decisions. So that's really, the fundamental success factor is you need to have people capable at the beginning of the project when you bring them together to develop personas, but also during the 2 days event from both sides. You need to have people who have this expertise and who can take decisions. Diversity and attitude. This is something that you can develop through the process. This is something that you build by bringing people together through the facilitation of the whole process and the different meetings and events you will be having there. But you need to have people who are proactive, people who are open-minded, and who can challenge their initial assumption. Things are going fast, and we might be coming to the room with a certain preconception of what would be the best solution. But then as we see the vendors, starting to present alternative ways of thinking, we need to have that ability to challenge our own assumptions. Again, the facilitation helps with this, but it's quite important still to have, people who are positively engaged in a way that they're ready to do this. Company readiness, I think what's key here is really to have a business sponsor, who's pushing for these types of approach, who sees the benefits, who's really encouraging everyone, like, for any type of a new initiative. And I think the important point is we can't use that in a company where everybody would be very risk adverse from the start. If you're in a situation where everybody is really, against anything new because they fear it's going to disrupt some of the important parameters they have in mind, then be careful about, running an agile vendor selection process. And the logistics is also a key success factor. Logistics very much in the sense of you need to have a very good setup in order to organize this meeting. They need to have a place where everybody can come together, but you also need to make sure you have a place where each of the vendor can feel, in their own corner, that they're not seen by the others, and they have their own privacy, I would say, and kind of a place where they can discuss with you some more confidential aspects, I would say. So also you can think of facilitation. This is intense days, and maybe it's a good idea to get support also from internal facilitators, people from an innovation team. This is always something that's can help really to guide the process for the 2 days. Anything you want to add, Andressa, on this point?
Yeah, I think it's really key, and I see as well with some questions here, like what are the hard skills we should take a look to have in this team. So it's really diverse team. So if you have everyone really in having the same skills, so you are going nowhere. So you need to have someone in that team that are able to plan the role of the speaker. So someone really being the facilitator of the team, could be someone external. In my cases, I took it myself. So you really have to have someone more extrovert to do that. You need to have someone really good on planning, because if you have just someone really doing stuff without someone planning, so it's not gonna work. So you need to have really um, diverse characteristics in the team. So someone planning, someone executing, someone really having the ideas, and someone formalizing it as well. So it's really a diverse team that needs to be in place.
Taking some of the questions that have been appearing, so someone has been asking, are suppliers ready to share presentation with competitor? The final pitch, the presentation from the supplier are only, to the buying company, are only to the stakeholders. So they are not attending each other presentation actually in the approach here. And after there's one question about if you accept change, how do you make sure that you end up, having what you've ordered that's really going to be the right thing. So you need to see as a funnel. By starting with the personas, you allow high-level expectations, you allow the vendors to leverage their expertise, leverage their journey, so they can help you to define more in depth what is really going to be to be delivered. But of course, after the event, as part of the final stages, there's a point where the requirement and the solution and the description of these are frozen, and that allows you to be able to make sure that what this funneling process has been bringing to the party is actually what's going to be delivered. You still have a contract at the end, that is going to be describing what type of outcomes, what type of output will be delivered by their solution.
Yeah, and also during the planning phase, so the first step, all of that risk assessment, you start the risk assessment by then as well. So you start to really see, okay, so what are the capabilities of that vendor? What kind of client references the vendor can have? Did that vendor really have experience on that? So you can have some benchmarking. You use your own benchmarking to start the risk assessment at that stage. And during the event itself, you can also ask those questions. So, of course, it's not all of the cases you can just solve everything during the breakout sessions with the subject matter experts. Some points we need to be discussed later. but we just need to make sure that it's before the contract signature. So then you have everything really assessed there and really formalize it in that sense.
Okay, maybe let me go and text back some of the questions. So, when is agile vendor selection the right way of doing things? So if you look at this picture, basically this is giving you the answer. This is the right approach where there is a certain degree of novelty. This is not a commodity that you buy. This is something where the suppliers can bring some new features and things are evolving quite rapidly. And this is a case where the risk and the stakes, some exist, but they're not too high. Okay, so that would be typically the situation where you would be using an agile vendor selection approach, and you might want to use other approach or to combine different approach depending of the situation. For instance, if you live in a world where the novelty is low and the risk and stakes are low, you want to go into a situation where everything is standardized and automated. So that's a totally different situation here. If you're in a situation, for instance, where you have a lot of risk associated with the selection of the vendor and the implementation of the solution, well, maybe you need to keep to the very classic process of RFQ we've been using with more distant interactions, but the possibility of checking and a few number of times all the element, auditing, visiting, getting all these elements into place. And if you live both in a world where there are risks and in a world where there's novelty coming from outside, then I would refer you to some of the webinars we've been doing in the past about using innovation workshops. So maybe you can use an agile vendor selection process toward the end of the approach, but before you need to anticipate. The agile vendor selection process is great to accelerate and being able to bring novelty in a short amount of time, when the risk and the stakes are not too high. If the risk and the stakes are higher, this is when you need to anticipate, work upfront, organize some innovation workshops, for instance, explore the solution space with a bit more time, and then toward the end, you might be able to, having selected a number of technologies and types of solution, you might use the agile vendor selection process there, or you keep using a more open innovation approach here. So I would not, recommend to use Agile RFP if you have, high amount of risk, or if you are in a situation where the demand is very straightforward. This is really here that this is adding value to the picture. But that can apply to software, that can apply to services, that can also apply for some, CapEx project, that can also apply for some products you might be buying for your company. You might run them slightly differently and adapt to the situation, but the logic, the principle, the fact of co-locating people, the fact of touching and seeing, the fact of starting from high-level requirements and then sharing this to see the solution that the supplier can bring, that would be the same logic at play. So I hope we've been able to answer your questions. Maybe I can I'll let you, Andressa. So we've taken some examples from the world of software and put this into this matrix. So you want to comment on this one?
Yes, in the software world, which is my word, like the decision we take, it's really based on the risk and the maturity of the market, for example. So if I'm buying, for example, a security solution, something which is much more stable in the market, so there is a big risk behind it. So the stakeholders, they really know specifically what they want. So then I wouldn't go for an agile RFP process because there is too much risk involved and it's already ready, let's say. So it's really to select the best vendor. But if we change, for example, for a word that everything is a platform, so every link you go and you share information, for example, you have a lot of SaaS out there. so software as a service. So, and it's all business driven. So, all the business, HR, out marketing, all those areas, they want something. And they are much more innovative by default as well. So in that sense is that the business is coming to you. I need that final product to be delivered, or I need, for example, a performance management solution. I need um, a, a platform to manage ethics, for example, which was one of the last cases I've done in Capgemini. So those cases really allows you to be more creative. And then you can feel as well, you can start every RFP process with an internal workshop, which is one of the basics of when we start such selection process. And you can have the feeling as well to determine and to access with your stakeholders if they are really willing to collaborate, because going quick doesn't mean that they're going to spend less time. So that's the opposite. They will really have to be dedicated. So you can access as well what are their feelings or their appetite to really run that kind of process. So it's really as well, you can combine, you can just go for one, can go for another one. So it's really flexible way, but I would advise really not to use too risky projects, for example, in that sense, or not completely in that sense. You can still use some of the things, but start more taking the whole risk in advance.
Okay, great. Yeah. So I think, this is not like a 100% ready-made solution that will, be the new magic one that will solve all the problem. The world we live in calls for more diversity in terms of process and practice within procurement. We live in a world where there's more need to be able to, run at the same speed that the business, run at the same speed of supplier. But depending of the situation, we need to pick the right way of doing this. So the what we've been showing here is actually four different ways, but behind these ways there are principles, there are certain mindset, and what's really important is, to find for you, behind the concept and the mindset, some inspiration to fit in these depending of where you would be buying. I think it's regaining the power on the definition of how do we go about selecting vendors, and it's about redefining how we worked in a very constructive way together with the internal stakeholders to make this happen, and how do we engage to the best level the suppliers, so we build on their knowledge, we build on their expertise. And one of the benefits that was highlighted also from that experience and some of the interviews I've done, both on the side of the supplier and on the side of the stakeholders, is, well, actually, when the project is closed, it's very quick to start on the implementation, because people have the perspective, people have understood, so the expectation, and there's been this joint process of getting close to a solution, finalizing the solution, and in an amount of time that really allows to move quite rapidly into the implementation. So yes, it might be taking quite the same amount of time during the selection process, but actually, in many situations, using the classic way, we kind of use some time before the selection, and then we get to put again quite some time afterward. And here, that helps to cut on some of these time needed to get things done all along the implementation as well. What are the results in terms of innovation? So, I mean, I'll give my perspective on this. You're much more open to solutions and options and novelty provided by supplier. So I would not expect from this to have radical solutions. There are solutions that radically innovative solutions. There are solutions that exist on the market, but they may be very different and very new for you as a company. And part of this process allows you to see the benefit from some of these. So this is a way of bringing some innovation. Less time. In the first slide, you showed you've saved 2 weeks. Not much. No, much more than that. Andressa, do you wanna reflect?
Yeah, so it really depends on case by case. So if I come back to the slides where you see the time here, so you really convert weeks, months into weeks. So that's the difference. But it really depends on the scope that you are taking because it's not really about time, it's about effort. So in a normal RFP process, sometimes you split the effort because it's much more sequential, let's say. So you split the effort here, a lot of effort and not too much and a lot. So in the agile way, you keep the effort and you prioritize what tasks matters most and which one of them it's not really important at that stage. So that's what makes you save some time in the timeline, but the effort is still big. Okay, good. I see.
Great.
Now it's clear as well.
Okay, well, thanks a lot, Andressa. Really been a pleasure to work with you on this project, and to contribute to share some of the practice, share some of the new way of doing things in procurement. There's still a lot to be done. We need to regain flexibility. We need to explore new ways of doing things. There will be a very short survey at the after I say goodbye to everyone. So I'll leave you 1 or 2 minutes. Are there any final questions? No. So thanks to everyone for being with us. Thank you, Andressa, so much all as well for your contribution and all the great work you've done here. I think this is really a role model case. So more people like that taking the lead and changing things in procurement. Fantastic.
Thank you so much, and for all the colleagues as well. I think that's that's really something for us to think. We are not just here to do savings. We are still have our KPIs on that, most of us, but really to bring business value. And by changing the way you do and engaging with stakeholders, you really are delivering value for them. So, thank you, everyone, and yeah, have a good day.
Goodbye. Thanks a
Bye.
lot.